It's all about basketball on today's episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. We're going to talk about why the Cardinals should go after former Mississippi signee Josh Hubbard. We'll also talk about Hailey Van Lith and Mykasa Robinson taking home All-ACC honors. With that being said, let's get right on into the show.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. For those who don't know who I am, I serve as a credential media member for Cardinal Sports Zone. Also do some PA announcing work for the university in various sports. I want to take this time to thank you all, as I always do, for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services, 5 days a week, your team every day. As I mentioned, all about basketball on today's episode of the show. We're going to talk about why I believe the Cardinals should go after a player that was just released from their national letter of intent from Mississippi, Josh Hubbard, 2023 guard that I believe Kenny Payne and company should start recruiting. We'll also talk about Hailey Van Lith and Mykasa Robinson taking home All-ACC honors. And to conclude the show, we will dive into a weekly mailbag segment. So to begin the show, well, obviously the men's basketball season's not over yet, but it kind of has been for a while in terms of record and what the postseason could look like or lack thereof. So a lot of people are talking about what the roster is going to be next season. We've talked about Dennis Evans. We talked about Churchill Abass. But a recent player has risen into conversation. That is Josh Hubbard, who was just released out of his national letter of intent from Mississippi when Kermit Davis was fired. Hubbard, a 5'10" guard from Mississippi, has been committed to the Mississippi program for a couple months, signed with the program, and now is back as an uncommitted prospect. Granted, I will say this, for those that are not Louisville fans watching this video, I do understand that the chances of him leaving the state of Mississippi for college are probably slim. I think that Mississippi State is going to be a big player in this recruitment. I also think that Mississippi, depending on who they hire, could also get right back into this recruitment. So I wouldn't necessarily write off either school. I think that it definitely could be a battle between the two. I'm just saying in this episode that Louisville should at least, kick the tires, go after Josh Hubbard. Whether or not that there's mutual interest, whether or not it is going to have any traction in the recruitment, that's yet to be seen. But I think at this point you won't know unless you go for it. I mean, sure, it's probably likely that he won't leave Mississippi, but who knows? For Louisville's sake, I think that this makes sense for both parties. I'm going to address the opposition to this right now. There's a couple of things that I've seen. Number one, Hubbard's not ranked the highest. Number two, he's not tall enough to be a guard in Kenny Payne's system. And number three, we need those scholarships for portal guards. Josh Hubbard, the leading scorer in Mississippi basketball history, is a player that can score at all three levels, does a good job of facilitating the ball, has a great feel for offense in the half court and in transition, solid on-ball defender as well that has a ton of athleticism. I mean, you see in a couple of different clips, him windmilling for being 5'10" is pretty special. Let's address the rankings part of this. Hubbard is ranked as the 89th best player in the class, according to the 24/7 Sports Composite, 15th best point guard, number one in the state of Mississippi. According to 24/7 Sports, he's 127 nationally, 16th best point guard, number one in the state of Mississippi. I get it. With the limited amount of scholarships left for the Cardinals to use, I mean, honestly, right now it's pretty it's pretty fluctuating at this point because you don't know how many players are going to come back, so on and so forth, right? So I think that, sure, I would understand if you're looking at this from, well, why use a scholarship on a guy that's ranked inside of the top 90 when you need players that are going to compete right away, that are going to be able to produce right away? Dalton, you've been saying that multiple times. I have been. That's correct. What I will say, and this kind of goes into the transfer portal part of this as well, is that, with the players you have coming in, none of them are guards. Let's say even if you go out and you get Dennis Evans and you get Churchill Abass, and you look at what this team could look like next year, assuming you get those players and let's say 4 people come back, you still have about 3 scholarships to work with, or actually 4 scholarships to work with. And you need to use that on guard play, especially if L. Ellis leaves. L. Ellis has kind of left the door open, but at this point in time, who knows? I think it's probably 50-50 on whether he goes pro or whether he comes back. But even if he does come back, you still need guard play. And let's say that you go out and you get a couple guards in the portal, right? You have a plethora of wings on the roster. If you bring back guys like Brandon Huntley-Hatfield, Dennis Evans, or you bring in guys like Dennis Evans, you bring back guys like Brandon Huntley-Hatfield, J.J. Traynor, so on and so forth. You have Emmanuel Okorafor, Churchill Abass in the front court. So you have, a good amount of players at the wing positions and in the front court, but you still need guard play. If you bring in transfer guards, you still have to plan for the future, because you look at this now as Louisville needs to be competitive this year, and they do. But they also need to make sure that they're not repeating the same process, because I understand it's the landscape of college basketball, but if you're consistently having to hit grand slams in the portal to make sure that you are competitive, that's not necessarily going to be a huge recipe for success, in my opinion. So I think that taking a player inside of the top 90, now granted, right away, only a handful of prospects from 50 to 100 in the rankings actually provide some production in year one of their respective college careers. But I think that Hubbard has the upside that you can bank on. Being a tremendous scorer, can score from pretty much all 3 levels, create his own shot, has solid handles as well. This is where a lot of people will say, well, he's not 6'4" or 6'5". I'm going to be honest. I understand that style of thinking. It looks good on paper. Smaller guards don't necessarily fit the scheme that Kenny Payne wants to run. A couple problems that I have with that, not necessarily trend, but with that phenomenon, with that style of thinking, is you are limiting yourself to some very, very good players just because they're not 6'5". I understand the advantage that you're trying to have with having, larger guards that handle the ball well, but let's be honest, there aren't that many 6'5" point guards. And when they do, they go to the NBA, because that is definitely, a rare commodity, as having a very tall guard that is very good at handling the ball, 2 guards as well. If you don't go after guard play, because at this point in time, you don't have a guard committed for next season. If you continually get guys that are 6'6" to 6'9" that can handle the ball somewhat, but they're not creators, they're not facilitators, you're going to be in the same issue that you're in this year, which is you have one guard, one solid guard in L. Ellis, and a handful of wing hybrid 2 guards potentially that aren't creators, and you're going to have this same issue. I have a problem with that style of thinking. Now, granted, I'm not saying that I know more than Kenny Payne, nothing like that, but I think that if you're going to hop on this podcast, if you're going to send in the comments, well, we're not going to go after him because he's not 6'5", he's not even 6 foot. If you can't see the issue with that style of thinking, because of right now, Louisville's not in a position to turn away very, very talented guards, especially when guard play is a position of need. And there aren't that many David Johnson-level guards who are 6'4", 6'5", that can handle the ball and facilitate at a high level. There's just not. There's not that many out there. And if there are right now, then they have already signed somewhere. So I think that, Josh Hubbard is a player that I think that, Louisville, whether or not that they get a commitment from or not, I think that he's a prospect that should be on Louisville's radar, that the Cardinals should go after, because he feels a direct need. At the very, I won't say at the very least, but I think that there's a solid chance that even though he's ranked in the top 90, that his scoring, repertoire, his ability to score the basketball he could be a depth piece, a rotational piece that even if you go to the portal and get some guards for next season, he could play some solid minutes leading into years 2 and 3 to be able to develop into a solid collegiate guard. But as of right now, I have a problem with this. Well, he's not 6'5" when the Cardinals do not have a single guard committed for next season, and that is the number one issue for this team right now. I just can't fall under that line of thinking. I'm sorry. So I think that the Cardinals should go after Hubbard. I think that I like what I see on tape. Obviously, I'm not necessarily a professional scout or anything like that, but a guy who's the number one scorer in Mississippi history can score at all three levels and create for his teammates. That sounds like something, that would be very beneficial for the Louisville Cardinals. So heading into the second segment, I want to switch gears a little bit, head into women's basketball talk, where two members of the team, Hailey Van Lith and Mykasa Robinson, both took home All-ACC honors. We'll talk about that here in just a second after we talk about our friends over at Built Bar. If you're looking for a delicious treat but don't want all of the fat and calories, then you have to try a Built Bar. For me, one of my holiday resolutions was eating healthier, but mainly I'm trying not to compromise taste as well. I'm doing a horrible job with that goal. But Built Bar gives you the best of both worlds. They have all of the healthy components of a protein bar, but they're covered in 100% real chocolate, so you get that that feeling of a chocolate bar as well. They have a wide variety of flavors, from churro, peanut butter brownie, coconut almond, and more. Usually you've had to get them at Built.com, but no longer. You can go to Walmart, get a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puffs in the pharmacy section. Or if you're not a Walmart person, you can go to Sam's Club, grab a 13-bar box with our hit flavors, brownie batter, and churro. You can thank me later. More opportunities than ever before at Built.com and at your local grocery stores, so take advantage now. Hey, Cardinal fans, thanks again for making Locked On Louisville your first listen every day. Make sure you check out our brand new podcast, Locked On College Basketball. Everything you need to know about college basketball all in one place. Plus, hear from big-name experts, insiders, coaches, and players. Locked On College Basketball, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, heading into the second segment of the show, two members of the women's basketball team, Hailey Van Lith, Mykasa Robinson, take home All-ACC honors. First team All-ACC for Hailey, all first-team defense for Mykasa. We'll begin with Hailey Van Lith. Once again, making an All-ACC team. She is 24th in the country, averaging 19.4 points per game, 5 rebounds per contest, going with 3.4 assists per game. Her shooting splits aren't the greatest. Hasn't been extremely efficient this year, posting career lows in field goal percentage with 41.2 and 3-point percentage with 28.7. But also career high in assists, career high in steals, so on and so forth. I think this year was one that a lot of people had high hopes for Hailey Van Lith. But I don't think that she's necessarily disappointed this season. Sure, statistically speaking, she hasn't necessarily been as efficient from the field as she likely would have hoped. But I will say this. You have to understand what her role is on this team. And understand that even though she's not shooting the ball all that well, what she's been able to do this season for Jeff Walls' team is nothing short of impressive. Because Brian Trent and I talked about this on the most recent episode of the show. We talked about if Louisville is going to make some noise in the ACC tournament and in the Big Dance, they're going to have to get consistent scoring from someone not named HVL. Because all season long, the number one issue for this team has been lack of a consistent secondary and tertiary scoring threat, a lack of a supporting cast, a consistent supporting cast for Hailey Van Lith. In turn, with Louisville not being able to give her that scoring help, what opposing defenses have been able to do is, okay, we are going to throw our best defensive packages at Hailey Van Lith, force her to, essentially get to the basket, forcing her to, fight off double teams, not giving her much room to shoot the basketball, essentially swarming her with the ball in her hands, because we know that Louisville has had some trouble having someone else step up outside of Hailey Van Lith. The scoring responsibility that Van Lith has been tasked with this season, it's unfair to her. Unfortunately, she has to deal with it, so I'm not, throwing a pity party or anything like that. I'm just saying that nothing she's doing is not impressive because she is the focus of every team's defense, and yet she's still scoring 20 points per game for an offense that lacks a true secondary scoring threat. Obviously, we thought that was going to be Morgan Jones. We thought that could be CeCe Carl. We thought that could be Olivia Cochran, Liz Dixon. And don't get me wrong, those players step up at times, but consistently, as we mentioned, outside of, I think it's CeCe Carr, I think one other player for the Cardinals scores in double figures. That is CeCe Carr. Peyton Verhulst is in the top 5 in scoring averages, and she hasn't been on the team for the past couple months. So nothing short of impressive from Hailey. Maybe not the season that she was looking to hope for in terms of shooting percentages, but still I think that she's had a very solid season. Mykasa Robinson, the other Cardinal that was also recognized for All-ACC honors. She is first-team All-Defense. In my opinion, and in the opinion of pretty much every other Louisville fan, she is not only probably the ACC Defensive Player of the Year, but also the National Defensive Player of the Year. Mykasa, statistically speaking, nothing's going to jump off the page. 4.7 rebounds per game to go along with 2.0 steals, which 2 steals a game, which is really, really good. And then 0.3 blocks. So statistically speaking, Mykasa Robinson, not necessarily jumping off the page of the box score, but Mykasa Robinson has never been a box score level player. She's always been an impactful player beyond the stat sheet, a player that completely leads your team on both ends of the court, a player that is very unselfish with the basketball. Over the past couple games has been very solid as pretty much the go-to point guard, and is the unsung hero of the defense. I think that you see her impact when she's not on the court, because you see how the Cardinals defense, I'm not going to say struggles, but loses that next level. Mykasa Robinson is a lockdown on-ball defender, does a good job of fighting over and under screens. Her understanding of half-court defense and allowing her to cohesively essentially be the quarterback of the defense, I should say. Being able to switch 1 through 4 and even guard the 5 at times, obviously only being 5'9", 5'8", 5'7". She's at a disadvantage going against players that are over 6 feet tall, but still she is a player that really is never out of the picture when it comes to getting steals, does a good job of trapping when needed to, just an overall winning basketball player on both ends of the court, especially defensively. This is no surprise to Louisville fans, just like the Hailey recognition. No surprise to Louisville fans that she is first-team all-defense in the conference. But it's still nice to get that recognition. She has had a fantastic season defensively. Just her swagger and her toughness. Jeff Wall said, she epitomizes everything that Louisville women's basketball is, meaning, that toughness, that grit, that determination, that I'm going to outwork you, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it type mentality that you get from Mykasa Robinson on a play out, play in basis, not even game in, game out, play in, play out, because she never takes one play off. Just an overall hustle player with an extremely solid motor, not afraid to put her body in harm's way and go after loose balls, take the charge, which she does very, very well. So extremely proud of Hailey Van Lith and Mykasa Robinson for their All-ACC honors. Obviously, the Cardinals will open up conference tournament play on Friday when they take on the winner of Florida State and Wake Forest and Virginia in the quarterfinal round. I believe it's the first quarterfinal match of the day on Friday. I could be wrong, but regardless, Louisville looking to cut down the ACC tournament nets for the first time since 2018. They will have to go through some tough opposition to do so. So For the conclusion of the show, want to dive into the weekly mailbag. Before we do that, want to thank you all again for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the Locked On the Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services, including YouTube and WHAS 11 Plus, 5 days a week, your team every day. I know at the beginning of the month, I said that this month was going to be very hectic when it came to scheduling. I appreciate everyone's patience and understanding when it came to the inconsistent scheduling and the programming of the shows. But I wanted to make sure that I got your monthly dose of shows. Thankfully, we were able to hit that mark, albeit on February 28th, but still able to hit the mark nonetheless. So regardless, we have one more segment of the month. That is the weekly mailbag. So a couple of solid questions. First one has pertaining to the men's basketball portal. Assuming that Louisville were to add Dennis Evans and Churchill Abass, how do you think Louisville fills the remaining spots? This is kind of hard to really talk about because I don't know who's going to come back, who's going to stay. I'm going to assume that, let's say Louisville brings 4 players back. You also, talk about the additions of Karan Davis, Caleb Glenn, Curtis Williams Jr., Dennis Evans, and Churchill Abass. That's 10 players. Wait, 10 players? 9 players. Let's see. Abass, Davis, Evans, Glenn, Williams. It's 5 and then 4. Okay, 9. I can't do basic math. So that leaves you 4 spots. I think that guards. I think that guards. I think you're probably looking to add 2 to 3 guards via the portal. Guys that have played solid minutes at either the Power 5 level or have been standouts at the mid-major level. Obviously, Sky Clark is a name that a lot of people talk about. Sky Clark would be a huge addition to this program, assuming that he does officially enter the transfer portal from Illinois. But he would be a great step in the right direction. But I think that you need probably about 2 to 3 guards and then probably best player available, going out and getting essentially the best player you can get from the portal, regardless of position. Because, look, this team's got 4 wins. You're not in a position to turn down the best players because it's not like, oh, we need to find the best fit. You're past that. It's about turning the roster over and getting the best players into this, into this roster. Because I would assume that the 4 players, and that's actually the next question is, who do you think comes back from this team? So we're for this exercise, we're going to talk about 4 players that are going to come back. I think that Emmanuel Okorafor is a player that's going to come back. The international prospect from the NBA Africa Academy is going to come back, only playing a handful of games. I think that, personally, if you had to make me choose, I think El Ellis maybe goes to the league. But I'm hoping that he were to come back. That would be big news because that brings back essentially a 20 points per game scorer. I think that Brandon Huntley Hatfield is another player that is likely going to come back. And then I think 2 of J.J. Traynor, Mike James, Devin Ree, and Jalen Withers. I think that those – and Kamari Lands. I actually – not Devin Ree. I think Devin Ree might actually enter the portal. But Kamari Lands, Jalen Withers, J.J. Traynor, and Mike James. I think 2 of those players will likely come back. So that's a solid nucleus of players. Emmanuel Okorafor. But all of those players are not ball-dominant guards. Sure, Mike James is probably the most of a guard on the roster of those 4. But, Traynor, Huntley Hatfield, Withers, Okorafor, even Kamari Lands, 3s, 4s, and 5s. I understand positionless basketball is no longer a thing, but you have to have guys that can handle the ball. You can't fall back on positionless basketball as an excuse for just going out and getting wings. I think you have to get guards as well. So I think that bringing Mike James back would be solid because, he is a pretty prototypical 2 guard that can defend, that can hit the 3, and also handle the ball and put the ball on the deck and go towards the basket. So I think players coming back, I think that's you're probably looking 4 players, maybe 5, depending if El Ellis comes back. But I think you're going to see a good amount of players, go elsewhere. So moving right on along. Do you see any way that El Ellis comes back? again, I think that there's probably about a 50-50 chance. He mentioned in the press conference that, he's either going to come back or he's going to go to the NBA draft. Obviously, he's going to test his, his pro stock, but I think that it's probably just going to be dependent on what he hears either overseas or from NBA draft scouts. But I think that there's a legit chance, especially if Louisville's able to overhaul the roster and, get NIL right and put him in a position where, look, okay, if you come back, we're going to be in a good spot to make the tournament because, if you're bringing a lot of this team back and you're trying to convince L to come back, it's you're bringing a lot of this team back from a team that literally just won 4 games. So I think that, I think that there's a legitimate chance. So do you think that Louisville could be a possible priority in terms of destination for big-time transfers across the country? I think there's a couple different ways to look at this. I think that people are going to use negative recruiting against Louisville this offseason from lack of success and trying to use that as a way to say, well, coaching isn't that great there because of the lack of success. There's no doubt that there's going to be some negative recruiting, but I think that Louisville is a blue blood program with ample playing time available. With an opportunity to play in front of a very passionate fan base in fantastic facilities in a Power 5 conference. But also, if Louisville gets the NIL right, which Josh Hubbard has been adamant on, the 502 Circle has been great. Kenny Payne recently has voiced his support in favor of NIL. If Louisville can get NIL figured out like they have on the football side of things, you have NIL, you have a blue blood program that has ample playing time that you can go get some production at in front of, a very, very solid basketball market. I find trouble to believe that Louisville couldn't go out and get some solid recruits or solid transfers from the portal. So that's going to wrap up the final episode of February. Have a great day, and we'll see you right back here in March.